All right, welcome to the party, everybody. As he mentioned, my name's Hyle. I lead the business team at Avail, working in the modular and interop space, and obviously joined by some pretty amazing people today. Maybe we'll start with just a round of introductions. We'll go from this way and then pass on that way. If you could talk about yourselves, a little bit about your projects, and we can dive in later.
Hi folks, my name is Sylve. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hyle. We're building a base layer for ZK and T applications. We basically handle sequencing, settlement, and that's basically all you need to build an app in 2025.
Hi, my name is Joshua, and I'm from Mantle network. So I lead the product team for the network itself. The network is currently an OP stack design. Technically, it's an Optimium, so we are modular. Currently, we use a unique implementation of eigenlayer contracts for EigenDA called Mantle DA. In the process of making that into actual using the AVS EigenDA. It's a L2, currently I think it's 4th largest in the ecosystem. Yep.
Hey, my name's Matt. I work at Off-Chain Labs, the initial builders of Arbitrum. Arbitrum is a platform for building blockchain apps and a fair financial system. And yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Welcome, folks. Today we're going to be talking about the future of Dapps and how infrastructure in the space is shifting towards this. I'm going to scoot up so I can see all you guys. I feel like I'm talking to just you here. All right. So, like the future of Dapps with regards to modular infrastructure, the shift that we're seeing across the world, but I think it's first worth looking at things from a high level, more on a definition side. So let's start with what modular even means, in your opinions. A lot of people have differing opinions. One could argue, like, layer 2s were modular, right? They're taking execution offline. But if you could take a stab at just defining modular infrastructure in general.
I'll try to take a stab to make it simple. At least from my perspective, modularity is just different components that work together. A large architectural difference from monolithic. This is really something we saw as an evolution in the traditional cloud infrastructure space, really separating repos into different repos and then different services and different companies and making sure they all work together. So there's obviously a lot of value creation and incentive alignment problems that come with modularity, which we're seeing in the EVM. But I think the core components that we're looking at today, at least from our perspective, building L2s and general scaling infrastructure, the different components are sequencing, so bundling and ordering transactions, execution, so actually processing and doing the computation, data availability, making sure that you post associated data to a separate layer that's available, and settlement, which is coming to finality and coming to consensus on the state of the chain. And we're seeing an emerging focus on, as another component, a large part of the reason why there's a conference here today around validation and verification. So that's how I think about it.
Anything else to add there, guys?
Well, I think it's pretty much covered the framework. You know, there are 5 parts, and I think for me to be more like accurate around this is I would put my perception around modular is these 5 components being able to be choosing different partners, different networks under different trust assumptions that you might want depending on what type of demographic you're serving, what type of users. Whether they want high performance at the trade-off of certain security assumptions, or whether they want much higher finality guarantees, and they're totally fine with high costs. So yeah, making those choices.
Yeah, I agree, and I think your analogy is good in that Web3 is evolving similar to how Web2 did, where in the internet today, there's tens of thousands of microservices that are specialized at performing their specific thing, and then it all just works behind the surface. Obviously, our UX isn't there yet, our DX isn't there yet, but I think we're on the way. You mentioned a little bit about the trade-offs, so let's talk about the why. Like, why are we even doing this? Why did layer 2s come out? Why are all these sequencers coming out? Why all these different specializations? What's been the bottleneck?
I don't want to overspeak here, but I think there's probably 2 important things that cause this. I think one is specialization. If you have one team trying to do everything, they're going to do everything poorly. So it just naturally makes sense for certain teams to focus on building certain parts of the stack and making improvements, and obviously delivering that to users and talking to the people who are using their specific technology. So I think that's just like a natural thing that comes with product development and building things generally, right? Like in every aspect of the world, not just crypto. I think the second of the why is censorship resistance and trustlessness, like you need a distributed operator set to ensure that there is shared ownership and a trustless general environment. And that's only really possible if you separate out ownership of the different components in a way that makes sense. I don't think we're anywhere close to figuring out what that actual architecture looks like. If you look at the way Ethereum upgrades and compare it to the speed of upgrade of the general internet infrastructure, we're moving incredibly slowly. So something needs to change, but I think you need distribution of power in order to build a system that's fairer, which is, I think, is the reason why everyone got in the industry.
There was a really good article a couple of years back about the unbundling of Excel, or Google, she don't remember which one it was, and it's
The unbundling of what?
of Excel,
Oh, okay.
which is everything runs on Excel. It's like the biggest programming language ever, and you can run payroll, you can run everything else. And the thesis of the article was like, but there's like 1,000 companies that have been built by unbundling parts of what people have been doing using Excel, basically. So I think that's what we're seeing as well with, for example, Ethereum, which was the first like general purpose blockchain that you could have. And like to your point, it really allows you to A, specialize in what you're doing, and B, really just move faster.
I think I agree with everything both of them said. I will add my slightly more unique perspective on the why. I think there are two, one of the key things I've always observed about this industry is as much as we can spin up yet another new fork, another new chain, which had happened like in 2 past cycles, the true kind of finite resource is capital and machinery. And this will grow in time, but at any one moment of time, these are truly finite. And for scalability or to address this, requires all that's being said, like being very specialized at certain parts of this block production, and at the same time being able to have that monetized in certain ways in these networks. And in doing so, you're able to then have a much more progressive evolution of Web3. And that to me is like a big why, and underpins actually Ethereum's early design around roll-up architecture. Like the concept to even do roll-ups, to do L2s, stems from this fundamental assumption that there will be finite machines and there will be finite capital at any one point of time.
I mean, there's so much happening in the modular space, right? And I like it. I like all the experimentation. I love the VM wars. I love everything about it. Just the experimentation, seeing what people are doing, where they're failing, where they're succeeding, and what most people end up choosing. Let's dive in on each of your specific tech ecosystems. I know a bit about yours too, so I have a specific question for you guys, but can you describe on a more technical level why you're building what you're building and then how you've implemented it?
Absolutely. So the one key insight that we have over at the Hyle team is that in order to build like a decentralized network for an application to run like basically a Dapps, you only need ordering, DA, and settlement. And currently, like if you look at the past few years of blockchain, we've really tried our best to cram ZK into the way that blockchains work. But as we understand, it's like the EVM is extremely ZK unfriendly. There's like discussions about maybe adding the Poseidon hash because it's very ZK friendly, and it's as if like Ketchup was just made on purpose to make your life worse. So what we're doing is we're rebuilding everything from the ground up. To your point, we're yet another L1, but we actually are building something that we do believe is completely different because we embed at the protocol level the only parts that you actually need to just speedrun everything else. So for example, execution-wise, you can use the EVM because the EVM is provable. You can use ROS because ROS is provable. And then you get into like the nitty-gritty of how do you actually build a network that makes it possible to use ZK in a production-grade environment, and that's basically our secret sauce. But like to your point regarding modularity, what that allows you to do is for the developer to really choose which execution environment they want, which level of decentralization they want, what kind of long-term storage they want. And currently, it's like a Ford T. You can have it any color you want as long as it's EVM compatible and on Ethereum. And we much rather have a lot more diversity over there.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue into a question about Mantle Network. You guys recently announced moving to OP Succinct, the OPSP1, and you mentioned ZK is hard to get into the EVM space, but it seems like now people are adapting. So why did you choose that? What is it doing for Mantle Network, and what do you think it's going to unlock kind of in the future?
Yeah, so I think we announced this. I think we're very interested in the ZK validity proof. What it unlocks is cryptographic mathematical guarantees in state transitions. They can then be verified on the L1. That essentially allows us to be like being very, very assured about the entire state transition, the entire part of that process, and being able to also have withdrawals the moment the L1 verifies the proof. And right now we're targeting something like 1 hour, but this is actually just purely architectural designs. But the question is why? And there will be trade-offs in terms of incremental costs. But we've also been seeing that the cost has been coming down, and looks almost like the efficiency of AI models. Like it looks the same trend, which looks very similar in terms of where that's going as an industry. So I think for us it's good enough. Now the question is good enough for what? And in adoption, we kind of see like there are many different kinds of use cases, and you need to, the kind of correct term is to move up the quality level in the target demographics. I think where we see the value this the most is institutional capital. And I think that's where we can potentially target total addressable market of traditional financial services, which is pretty much the entire economics, global economic kind of GDP. And that to us is like the biggest value capture. And institutions today, they operate on a 24-hour T+1 day kind of mechanism, best case scenario.
Yeah, usually T+3 or more.
So for us, T+1 hour is a huge innovation from their perspective. And our current thesis is that this is probably where we will see the adoption of part of the cycle. And for us, good enough is enough.
Yeah, I worked at Goldman Sachs for almost 7 years, and T+1 was a good case, right? T+3, T+5, and it's just inefficient. And it's not 24/7. It's business hours in your country, which very inefficient. Matt, to you, I think the extension of what we're already talking about in ZK and the EVM, when Arbitrum came out half a decade ago, one of the first, like the OG layer 2s, ZK wasn't there, to be honest, not even close. I didn't think it'd be this far along, this half a decade later. But so naturally, you went with the optimistic version of your layer 2. Are you guys looking at ZK? And if so, how, why? And then if you can give any alpha on like what that roadmap looks like, but would love to hear your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about finality. That's all that ZK unlocks in the proving space of L2s. Obviously, people are doing on-chain verification actually today on Arbitrum using ZK proofs. The tech is out there, but to do general block proving, it's very complicated. Yeah, we're targeting this. We talked about this, I think, a little bit recently, 2 weeks ago in our interoperability roadmap update. Our target is T+3 seconds, right? We want fast cross-chain operations that happen trustlessly on the order of 3 seconds or less, because from a UX perspective, we think that's probably the best we can aim for at this cost that we think are gonna, come to market soon. Yeah, so we're investigating this. We want multiple ZK VMs, multiple proving clients integrated directly with the core Arbitrum technology. I think, the way that this shapes out is you have a consolidation of a few chains that are in the market today that are the maximum security for value to be settled, ideally entirely on those layers. And we see kind of application, execution, and logic happening in a tertiary space. Like we see this a lot with L3s. Base just announced their kind of entire framework yesterday. So yeah, we're definitely targeting. And as you mentioned, I mean, we have a very practical approach, which is how much are users and project teams willing to spend to make their business work? 4 years ago, 5 years ago, ZK was like, you're taking out, a multi-million-dollar loan from the bank to build the infrastructure yourself, even to bootstrap one single component that really you don't necessarily need. Today, we're seeing, cents on the dollar for a block to be proven in the EVM, which is amazing. One thing I'll say, just, not to, I think ZK is very, very interesting and very, very exciting, but it's very complicated. And when you rely on proofs and external provers and math that you don't understand yourself to verify the state transition function of your chain, it really changes the security model, I think, from traditional finance institutions to move on to that architecture. And so what we're going to have to do as an industry is make it very easy to understand how the architecture works, because we're all really excited about it, but it's incredibly hard to reason about it. And I think that's a very large distinction from just re-executing the code on your computer.
Yeah, I agree. Two comments and then a question. One is ZK is cool because it gets roll-ups to stage one. And then smaller teams, like the OP6 Inc., gets them to stage one almost immediately, I think. And smaller teams, when you look at the L2 beat page, a lot are not there yet. So that's pretty cool, that enhancement. And then two, I really am excited about the interop stuff that you guys are working with. Ethereum Foundation, Unichain, across, and the 7683 model. It's pretty badass that you guys are pushing this forward. So thanks for what you're doing there. And then the question, I actually lost the question, so I'm going to keep going. Obviously, another big part of what we're doing is discussing the future of Dapps, right? Both from a Dapp development perspective as well as from me as a DGen end user perspective, power user. Let's talk about what kind of Dapps are building in your ecosystems. So I think most of us can agree that DeFi still kind of reigns supreme, is the killer application, the product market fit. RWAs in the sense of stablecoins. You look at how profitable Tether is, 13 billion net profit in 2024, which is freaking crazy. Is DeFi still the majority of use cases in your ecosystems? I know you're still getting going and everything. Like what are you seeing? And even if so, what are the most exciting or even surprising use cases that you like to see people building out right now?
What we think is actually really interesting, and to your point regarding DeFi, it's incredible that DeFi managed to grow that much with that little like real world assets actually crossed over. They have like stable coins acting like the Spider-Man in the Spider-Man 2 movie, like trying to keep everything together. And the one part where I actually think that ZK can really shine is that we talked about interoperability, we talked about scaling, obviously there's privacy, that was the first use case. But the one thing where we're really, really excited about Hyle is the ability to permissionlessly port signed data or just data with ZK TLS directly into the great DeFi engine that we had. So we managed to create like gigantic economies, and these are thanks to like the speed of iteration that we have, thanks to like open sourcing and permissionless composability. I mean, we have perps, like this is just fantastic, even in TradFi world. Imagine if we could use that with other primitives such as like permissionless credit score, under collateralized loan, because I'm able to prove that my past 3 payslips are actually above a certain threshold. So that's really what interests us over at Hyle, is like using ZK, not necessarily for scaling or privacy, but you get that for free basically, but more rather for the accessibility and the extension of the domain that you can have over the blockchain space.
Real quick, can you go over ZK TLS? A lot of people aren't as familiar because it's a new thing. I think it's badass. Web 2 to Web 3, even Web 3 to Web 3. Can you just give a quick primer on what ZK TLS is?
Absolutely. So you have on the one hand the great world of blockchain, which is like a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific that has one single plane every day that comes to the real world. What ZK TLS does is it allows you to port data from the rest of the universe into that tiny island. How do you do that? Ideally, you'd like this data to be signed by like a reputable source, the government or anything else. But because not a lot of data is signed, what you do is that you're going to trust a notary to sign that data along with you. So there's different models. There's the people of opacity that are doing MPC. Other people are using TEEs. But the crux of the problem is that this data is not signed, like cryptographically, so you don't know where it comes from. So you're using a protocol to sign it with you. It's basically like it's the same problem that how do I prove to you folks that I have $50 on my bank account? Like it's a dumb problem, but it's still pretty difficult. So what you do is that you log in on your bank account along with the notary, and it's going to look at the same thing that you're looking and attest it.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. And let's keep going with DeFi versus what else is building in Mantle, and then we'll talk about Arbitrum.
Yeah, I think we're really exciting. We have 3 new kind of key product lines on top of the fact that we have a yield-bearing ETH product. We have a FBTC, which is a very favorable yield-bearing Bitcoin. And now we also have a yield-bearing index fund. So we're focusing on an ETF equivalent traditional financial subscription-based situation.
Where and that's on stocks, or is that in Web3 assets? What is that on?
That is crypto majors. So it includes all your big assets, big asset plays. With the question, do you believe in these assets? The next question is, well, if you believe in these assets, do you believe that they should be yield-bearing? which is a dominant game theory strategy if you believe in these assets. And I think in institutional finance, that's the way to go. And what we're very excited is that this is going to be something that counts as TVL for secured on the blockchain. And this is what I strongly believe in why we need these institutional grade assumptions for the chains that we work with that don't just make pre-confirmation assumptions around block production. That's not acceptable for them. Yeah.
What about FBTC? Does that yield come from Babylon? Does it come from somewhere else?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so FBTC is very similar to WBTC in the sense it itself is not yield bearing, but it's a portability and unlocks a lot more capital. So one of the key realizations in Mantle I want to share is I think everybody realizes this, that we are in a phase of institutional adoption, but be careful what you wish for, right? Institutional adoption doesn't mean what we all Web3 people think about. What that means is actually very different. Crypto major assets are going to qualify custody. They're becoming colder. They're actually coming out of the total addressable market for innovators like ourselves. So without these assets and without these structures in place, with institutional grade quality, we are going to reduce the total addressable market for innovation. And so for us, that's what we're really concerned about on the asset level. And with these building blocks, innovators like yourself can then count that as TVL and grow into the next biggest thing. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? I mean, there's so much going on in the Arbitrum ecosystem, the Orbit ecosystem. So what are you seeing, DeFi and the rest, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I think there's three major areas we care a lot about. Obviously, we like to say Arbitrum is the home of DeFi innovation. You know, a lot of assets secured, a lot of teams trying to build new, exciting yield protocols. I'm not a DJ. I'm a macroeconomist.
Missing out.
Yeah, I like to, put money into something that grows slowly over time. But yeah, we care a lot about that. I think we're seeing a lot of new innovation in DeFi. There's a team called Renegade building on-chain dark pools using ZK verification, made possible because of Stylus's computational efficiency. But yeah, DeFi gaming is another one. I'm also a gamer, so very skeptical of on-chain gaming. There are a few teams we really believe in that are building really interesting frameworks that allow for, let's just say, ad hoc modding of game engines that are built on-chain, which I think is a really cool primitive. You can tie that to on-chain governance to allow people who are playing the game to actually vote on what changes. Similar to how you see people, harassing devs in Discord until the new release comes out and they've actually changed that one minor thing you're bugging them to fix. So that's another big vertical. I think the third thing that's just connected to both of them is payments. Blackbird announced their Arbitrum Orbit chain, I think yesterday or the day before, which is a rewards system for paying restaurant bills, which is, okay, great. That's an actual use case. I think long term, I'm really excited about savings in crypto. Like most people that use blockchains today are speculating. They're not putting their money in there as a store of value because they know that, one, they're not going to get rugged, and two, that it's actually going to grow at the rate that it says it's going to grow without getting an email from, let's say, Goldman Sachs in Apple's case saying, we changed the rate, sorry, bro. And I think that is going to happen very, very soon with the wave of institutions coming in. But just to comment on your point, I think we're starting to see that, like we were trying to avoid this whole time, yield and assets are really tied to whoever controls power over them. And these institutions that are moving in are big friends with this other group called the government, which has a lot of power. And I think our ability to navigate working with these large institutions is a requirement. We can't just skirt around it, but we need to focus on that to build something that people actually want to use.
Yeah, on that stablecoin aspect and the interest, I think it's a really exciting unlock for the world. Right now, again, Tether makes so much money, USDC makes money, that yield goes to them because they put it in treasuries, again, an RWA asset. I'm excited about people unlocking stable coins in places, very poor parts of the world where their currency is like a 20,000 market cap shitcoin. And so when you do that, you enable them to literally change their paradigm understanding of money where they're uncertain, and you go to a stable asset, and it could give yield to them. So for the first time in their lives, maybe, they'll be able to be in a stable asset that earns, that's accessible 24/7 all around the world. I think that can really change how people look at money and how people save around the world. So I'm really bullish on what it can do for the global society. And one thing you mentioned, stylus, I know about it, but can you explain what that is and what that unlocks? Because it's a huge unlock for different languages.
Yeah, so stylus is a feature of Arbitrum chains that allows you to build in WASM-based programming languages. There's a secondary VM running alongside the EVM. Today we support Rust, C, and C++. So you can deploy contracts on Arbitrum chains today that can call into Solidity contracts. So it's essentially one entirely compatible ecosystem. The other thing, just to mention really briefly, is because of the teams that are building these languages, the decades of experience they have compared to Solidity, doing things like highly computationally intensive operations on chain using stylus is actually much more gas efficient than if you're building a contract in Solidity. So it's compatible, interoperable with the existing EVM, but actually cheaper to build applications that you would otherwise want to build off chain.
And just to give some context on that, to realize how big an unlock that is, there's a few hundred thousand, maybe 20,000 active developers around the world, but a few hundred thousand Web3 developers. There are 3 million plus Rust developers, and there's over, I think, 12 million C++ developers. So it is a massive unlock for people to come and be able to build. And Solidity is inefficient in a lot of ways, so I think it's really important to give that optionality. So it's great you're doing that. When it comes to the modular infra shift and how it's affecting the world of dApps, I know we've already talked a little bit about it. Like, what is it unlocking that is currently blocked and or not efficient enough for what they're building? And Matt, I want to start with you, specifically pointing to the Arbitrum Orbit stack. There are a ton of folks building Arbitrum Orbit chains. I'm working with a lot of them, and which is exciting to see. What do you think Orbit is unlocking specifically for dApp developers, either considering building an app chain or already in the process?
Yeah, there's three things. I'll put on my consultant hat. Like, there's these different buckets. So one is sovereignty. So when you're launching an app on another chain, someone else controls that chain. Let's just be honest. At L1, it's a bunch of developers that are amazing that come and meet and decide what to do, and in social consensus, we'll talk about that problem later. But if you're launching an Arbitrum 1, there's the Arbitrum DAO with the Security Council. They might upgrade things slower than you might if you're running a chain yourselves because they want to wait for technology to mature, or maybe they're not comfortable with certain technical trade-offs. So if you're launching your own chain, you have full control of that environment. So sovereignty of your assets, sovereignty of the bridge, sovereignty of the node software that you're telling your developers to use. Second is customization of the economics. Personal beliefs aside around the fragmentation of currency in this space, which I think is a huge problem, a lot of businesses want to build economies around an asset that they control. So in games, they have an in-game asset. You can make that your fee token. You can build other parts into the protocol and customize the way that fees are actually passed on to developers of certain contracts natively as part of your chain. And you can only do that using our stack because we allow you to customize the node software in any way you want. The third is cost. I think this is the most important aspect in why we see chains being launched. There's two dimensions here. One is just avoiding congestion on an underlying blockchain. So if you're deploying an app on Arbitrum 1 or Ethereum or Optimism or Base, all of the other apps, if they have a really great launch and you're also trying to launch, fees will go up at the same time, and now you have to tell your users, hey, sorry, the prices went up because these other guys were winning. And obviously, we're all working to make costs go down, but that's a huge reason why applications that care a lot about stable fees and liveness migrate to their own chain. The second, and then I'll shut up, part of cost is just DA flexibility. So Mantle's obviously made a lot of improvements in their architecture and choices here, but not every application needs to post data to Ethereum. Ethereum is an incredibly valuable resource that should be treated as such, and some teams are comfortable posting their call data to an S3 server, which, again, issues with that.
It just came out.
But and so we provide a committee-based model, but I think a lot of teams make that trade-off because they're comfortable, and quite frankly, their users and their application logic don't need historical data. They just need it for about a week to finalize the state of the chain, and then they don't care about it ever again. So that's what we're seeing.
What about you guys? What do you think modularity is unlocked for you guys? I'm sure it's fee capture, sequence of revenue, all these other things. Is there anything else you'd add?
Yeah, Matt really covered it really well. But I also do think that it's even sometimes like a key part of like making the trade-offs happen to be maximum. I think of it this way, like for Ethereum to be maximally decentralized but also maximally scalable, one of our current, like right now, today, 2025, the bottleneck is we cannot address the meme coin use case of the Trump coin. Like, it's impossible. With Ethereum blobs today, max out, total market max out 1,000 TPS. Solana is broke at 6,000 TPS because of the Trump coin. So we can't even adopt a speculative use case. Let's agree it's speculative, that's fine. But it's a use case that humans out there, real humans, are speculating upon, and we cannot do that. And the only way to do that is with like Avail, with EigenDA, where we have throughput that's over 200,000 TPS. And that's where all the new next generation architectures in terms of fast execution, huge amounts of TPS per second capabilities are coming from, and they have to use these alternative DAs. It's like mission critical, but also maximally decentralized, because then when they submit proofs on the L1, you have 1.8 million validators that Ethereum has today. Like, who's going to shut that down?
Yeah, anything you'd add on what you guys are enabling beyond what we've already discussed? And if not, that's fine. We can continue on.
I think something that maybe encapsulates a lot of what you were saying, Matt, is I think it's just flexibility at the developer level. And what we're seeing on our end is that it's really redefining what we consider an app chain should be or an L3 should be. I mean, there's kind of like a skeuomorphic way of thinking about it. Like, I hate this word, but that I think that's actually the apt word here, is that, oh, my app chain should be a blockchain. But not everything has to be a blockchain with like a public explorer or something else. Like, if I'm running like a DeFi app, for example, maybe I want the app to be confidential. I just publish, like, the code has been audited, you have a ZK proof that it's actually the code that's been audited that's running, and I post a state proof every day. And that's fine. But it's really redefining what you consider a blockchain app in general, and it doesn't necessarily have to have blocks, basically. It's just an app.
I'm about to get the hook here in a bucket of cold water. So 2 more quick questions. Hopefully we can get them out. One is, a big part of why I joined this space is value alignment around decentralization, censorship resistance. But we've seen folks slow to adopt decentralization. And we've actually seen people go a bit more centralized, as we've seen recently. What do you think of the trade-offs of decentralization from day one, about why are we so slow to adopt decentralized sequencers? I think Arbitrum is leading the pack there if you look at L2Beat. So I'd love real quick answers on that, and then one more.
Sure. So the first question was, why are teams slow to adopt decentralized primitives? Yeah. And the second was, I'm sorry.
I think it's all around why slow decentralization. Since I'm here for decentralization,
Right,
not everyone is.
Okay,
And do you think there are good trade-offs?
Yeah, the trade-off space is definitely interesting. I try to be very quick on this. So there's a cost to decentralization. The cost is financial and speed and time to market. And I think most teams that join crypto and joined in the past were not product people. They weren't trying to build something for users. They were building a new piece of novel technology. And it's really interesting and amazing to over-optimize for a property when you forget that users are trying to get an action done.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's very easy to just bootstrap something that you find very interesting. The second thing which I'll say, which is kind of like the uncomfortable bit, is that launching a decentralized service makes your token narrative easier to sell and to deal with in a regulatory environment. And I think that is bad, straight up. Like, over-optimizing for an asset is just not a way to build a business, especially in an increasingly fragmented ecosystem when now you have teams that have assets and ecosystems that are competing with other teams that we're supposed to be working together with. So we're going to have to deal with that. It will come to a head, but that's why I think people over-optimize for that aspect.
So we maybe end up in a world where if regulation loosens, we just lose out on decentralization.
Yeah, I would say the big property I think majority of people want out of decentralization, think of it, is it unstoppableness, like unstoppability, or is it unruggability? I think people prioritize unruggability.
I mean, I would love both, but yeah.
Yes. So I think because of this, like there's a minute difference between them, but it is non-trivial. And as a result of that, due to expediency over going to market and trust assumptions that are more like, okay, if I can control this, we won't be rugged. With these assumptions, I think it's this time frame in history where I think that's where people are. I think earlier Matt talked a lot about like state actors and their sort of regulatory hand over the industry. I think that is where I perceive, and somewhere down into the future, that's the full adoption of decentralization.
Yeah. All right, well, we're getting the axe. We got to cut it off. But thank you to the panelists. Thanks for everyone for listening, and hope you all leave without COVID.
Thanks a lot.